In this presentation, I'll be examining how internal or structural factors and external or social factors have affected the genesis of scripts and how well the scripts survive in the face of competition from others. And I'll be, I'll be looking at a particular group of related scripts historically used in Sumatra, Sulawesi, and Sumbawa and Flores, and the Philippines. And I'll be concentrating in particular on the Philippine script varieties for what they tell us about the ultimate origins of these scripts, and the Jangang-Jangang script of Makassar in South Sulawesi. But I'll also be referring to some interesting features of Sumatran scripts as they relate to the ones further east, and they give us more information or insights on the origins of these scripts. Now, the most widely accepted hypothesis of the origin of scripts in island Southeast Asia is that they originate in the so-called Kawi script, or Old Javanese Malay script, found in inscriptions from over a millennium ago. And when we compare Kawi letter shapes with counterparts in the next three columns, the systematic relationships are pretty obvious. On the other hand, if we compare the last four columns of scripts, we don't see any systematic relationships, though there are scattered similarities here and there in some of these scripts. And from the viewpoint of historical linguistic methodology, when you want to establish a relationship, what you need is systematic and regular structural correspondences to demonstrate such a relationship. And in other work, I've proposed that we see just these correspondences, especially when it comes to the earliest records of Philippine script, with North Indian Nagari script and Gujarati script as it was developing out of Nagari. So basically, we see direct correspondences between Philippine letter shapes and letter shapes of early Gujarati as it was developing out of Nagari. And this may be surprising at first, but it's well known that Gujarati traders were active in Sumatra and Malacca in the 14th through the 16th centuries and traded as far east as Sulawesi. Now, the basic thing to know about Nagari letters is that generally they are formed by a horizontal headstroke at the top of the letter and a stem, a vertical stem on the right, with a body that can be clockwise, counterclockwise, starting from the top, starting from the middle, starting from the bottom, various different body shapes. And what we find in Gujarati script is that very early, this headstroke reduced to a very short initial tick on the left side, the top left side of a letter. And this is shared by the letters in the Philippine script. What distinguishes them especially from the Gujarati script is that the join with the vertical stem is reduced to, in most letters, a short tail, a short downward curving tail. And in a couple of letters, instead of that tail, we have a sort of counterclockwise swoosh going upwards in just a couple of letters. But otherwise, the base body shape corresponds quite closely between the Nagari or Gujarati and the Philippine script letters. And we see the same sort of thing happening with bodies that start from the bottom. And there the headstroke and the stem correspond in the Philippine letters to a sort of dip and rise and then the falling tail again. And the body of the letter is added later on. And here, just very quickly, I'll go through a bunch of other letters to show the similarities. You can see that the similarities between the letters are pretty systematic, especially for the body shape. Same here for these letters too. They're less typical. They're not the usual body plus stem shape you find in most letters, but still you see that the Philippine shapes are reflected quite closely in the Nagari and Gujarati shapes. So when you apply these regular correspondences, regular changes that apply to the Philippine letters, without the extra changes, you can reconstruct an intermediate proto-script that you see in the orange band here. And then the extra further changes that apply after are found in the Philippine letters below. And here I've just added 4 letters at the end from Bugis-Makasarese script that don't have any counterparts in the Philippine script to show that they also correspond quite closely through systematic changes to the Nagari and especially Gujarati letters shapes. So you get an idea of the overall look of Bugis-Makasarese script here. Now, Campbell McKnight mentioned that one of the things that Bugis-Makasarese and Philippine script have in common is vowel sign doubling. So that's when you have two consonants or two syllables beginning with the same consonant, you can abbreviate them by writing the consonant sign just once and doubling up the vowel signs on it. Okay, so you have two E here above the la, two O following the pa here. It's very common in South Sulawesi documents, but it's rather rare in Philippine script. And in fact, these are the only examples we actually have, but still it's the same principle. For example, we have Don Agustin Tiwalag here. Sorry, Don Agustin Tiwalag. So you see the T spelled separately twice here, but down below he spells the T letter once and combines the two E dots above it, above the single letter. So this is another example of things that the Bugis-Makasarese and Philippine script have in common that they share. And I believe this probably results from the way that the combinations of consonants and vowels were taught in spelling. So here from the Doctrina Christiana, 1593, we have the letters listed in their standard order. And for every consonant sign, you see the E sign above and the U sign below. The Tagbanwa on Palawan Island did the same thing, and they had a special recitation, a special way of reciting this, langlaylo, langlay, mangmaymo, mangmaymi, and so on. In South Sulawesi, according to Marsden in 1834, they did something similar. They combined all the signs around a base letter, a consonant letter. And if you unpack them, you get something quite similar to the Tagbanwa recitation. Tateti, tu, if it's Bugis style. If you take this as the n or the sound that it was used in Makasarese, you get tateti, tu, which is very reminiscent of the Tagbanwa recitation. Now in South Sumatra, there's something very similar again, okay? But it's a bit more complicated. There they recite the first consonant, ka, for example, then the name of a sign they combine with it. And after that, the resulting syllable. So ka, kujujung, okay, here's kujujung, ka, kujujung, kar. Kaluan, kir, kabitan, kur. Okay? So the name of the consonant, the name of the sign, and then the resulting syllable. So this is very unusual because in most Indic scripts, they just recite a table that shows all the combinations individually for each vowel. Interestingly enough, in northwestern India, Kashmir is one place, they had exactly the same system as in South Sumatra. So this South Sumatran method of teaching consonant and vowel and final consonant combinations is not just something from island Southeast Asia. It's attested in northwestern India. So he says the name of ka is kov ka, and that of non-initial a is wahai, and the akshara ka is therefore named kov ka wahai ka. The same structure as in South Sumatra. So this, I think, is a very good clue, in addition to all the other clues, to an origin of these scripts in northwestern India. So originally these scripts were hybrid in nature. The base letters are, I think, clearly systematically related to early Gujarati script and North Indian shapes developing from older Nagari script. But the vowel and final consonant signs aren't from Nagari. They're taken from Kawi, or old Javanese script. And again, the teaching method is traceable to Northwest India. Now, this is a puzzle. The North Indian commercial shorthands, which we would assume is what the Gujaratis imported, often omitted vowels. So it's not surprising that the Malays who learned them would have adopted the Kawi or Javanese final vowel and consonant signs. but then why would they adopt the Northwest Indian method of teaching the combinations of consonants plus added signs? And also really strange is that the Sumatra, Sulawesi, and Philippine scripts don't have numerals. They don't have numerals from the Nagari scripts. They don't have numerals from Kawi. Why didn't they borrow the numerals if they were going to be used for commercial purposes? So my hypothesis is that instead of being adopted as a commercial script, it was created as a secret or subculture script, perhaps among youth. And we find parallels in other scripts of the archipelago. So in South Sulawesi, there's a hybrid script called Lontara bilang-bilang, the numbers script, used by the Bugis in the 19th century to send secret messages during the resistance against the Dutch. And the interesting thing is that though the letters as such are based on Arabic numerals, okay, the vowel signs are taken directly from Bugis-Makasarese script, exactly the same vowel signs. And here's just to prove the origins. Lontara bilang-bilang also has Northwest Indian origins. It was invented as a cipher script there so that a combination of numbers could actually hide a message. Anyway, there's another script in South Sulawesi that works on the same principle. It's better known, the Makasarese Jangang-Jangang script. And here you see all these interesting looking letters, quite different from Bugis-Makasarese script, but they also use the same vowel signs as Bugis-Makasarese script. However, it's hard to see any relationship. There's different shapes for the same sound values, and it's very rare if there are any that seem to share anything systematic in terms of their shape. And sometimes you have the same shapes with completely different sound values. But it turns out that they're basically, most of the letters are taken from the South Sumatran Surat Ulu script, okay, rotated to vertical, where Surat Ulu letters are generally about 45 degrees angled sloped. But a few letters are taken from other South Sumatran scripts, and there are actually 4 that I think I can prove are taken from Javanese script. I'll return to this in a moment. But here's a nice example of an attestation from 1881 of this particular script style in South Sumatra, used for romantic or courtship purposes among youth. Okay, there's a whole bunch of these styles that we use, but this particular one called Gajah Mukur, I'm not quite sure, but I think it may be meant to mean elephant striking or something of this sort. In any case, you can see that the letters are all rotated to vertical, and we actually have an artifact with this Gajah Mukur style on it, with an inscription in Malay, Kepada Tuan Sakarman dari Ahmad, for Mr. Sakarman or Zakarman, depending on whether he was English or Dutch, from Ahmad. So here we see that if you take the basic South Sumatran letters and you apply the curvy method of writing them that is used in Jangang-Jangang, they conflict with already existing letters, so you can't really use them. And it seems that for that purpose, they actually borrowed these Javanese letters and just slightly modified them after rotating them backward. But these came from the hand of one specific writer. So here we see the letter J in 3 variants, 2 that are particular people's handwritings, but they're more or less standard in shape. The 3rd one is kind of bunched up to the left. It's a very strange kind of handwriting. And there's one person that seems to have just what we what corresponds to this particular strange shape. And this is a scribe who wrote one particular letter for the Sultan of Banten to the Dutch in 1619. And you see the letter K here, the letter J here as well, J. And these letters were basically adopted. I'll go back just to show you. Basically taken and slightly changed in form to stand for K, also G, and for Y. Now, why the j? Well, I think most Makasarese who had contact with Bugis knew that the Bugis didn't have a y sound. Instead, they had a j sound in their language, corresponding to y in Makasarese. So the island of Selayar is Silayara in Makasarese, but Silaja in Bugis. And I think that's why the j letter was applied to be used for y in Jangang-Jangang. Okay, so it's based on the South Sumatran Surat Ulu youth subculture, courtship style, okay? And the angular shape of the South Sumatran letters was just smoothed out to the arches of Bugis-Makasarese script. And several other scripts were used as well. The vowel signs, again, are directly from Bugis-Makasarese, not from South Sumatra. So it's a hybrid script again. The interesting thing is the name of the script is related to the Makasarese expression jangang-jangang, and Campbell McKnight can correct me if my memory is incorrect, but it has to do with courting young women, basically going after chicks. Jangang meaning a fowl or a bird. So I think this is a clue to the earliest function. They adopted it from the similar South Sumatran romantic style. So I think it was originally adopted as part of youth subculture, just traversing the ocean between Sumatra and South Sulawesi. But then it was adopted by Makasarese court and society in general as an emblem of Makasarese identity. And why this? Well, at the time, the Makasarese were having a hard time with the Bugis to their north. And they were actually defeated in a war in 1667. And after that time, we see in the documents that it's gradually abandoned in favor of more and more use of Bugis-Makasarese script. So just to go over the survival of the various scripts, and we see how the Jangang-Jangang script faded out in the face of Bugis-Makasarese script after the defeat in the face of the Dutch and Bugis alliance. In South Sumatra, the scripts were pretty good at spelling words. What you write is what you read, and it's basically one-to-one correspondence. So there was a very good fit between the orthography and the sound structure of the languages. And these continued to be used through the 19th and at least the early 20th century in parts of Sumatra before Latin script became general. Now, in Sulawesi, they didn't write final consonants, but since there's only, depending on whether you're at the end of the word or inside of a word, there's basically a contrast between two possible consonants only. So it's not that difficult to guess which consonants you have to fill in. But in the Philippines, basically you can have any consonant at the end of a syllable. So not spelling them, okay, leads to a problem. It makes it much more difficult. And this led to people in the 1600s actually trying out ways of spelling final consonants. So one, the most famous, is what's called the cross kudlit. So here we see in the Ilocano Catechism from 1621, sorry, an example of the cross kudlit here under the letter na. And it just means that you don't pronounce a vowel after the consonant. So it says itin sulat ditoy iti Doctrina Christiana. Okay, so this is what is written here is Christian doctrine. This was introduced by the Spanish person who put together this doctrine, but it wasn't widely adopted in any case, except in modern times. Now in Pampanga, they had a slightly different version of the script. And there in the 1620s, 1630s, they developed conventions that we find in the 5 different hands that are basically the same. At the end of a word or a word group, they would write a letter that normally would be pronounced with an a at the end, but by convention, you wouldn't pronounce it. So this woman's last name is Pangisnawan, and they just write the na there, but don't pronounce the a. Same with the last name Maniwad. They write the da letter, but don't pronounce the a. Inside a word or word group, they use the letter, the vowel sign e. that usually spells out the E sound, but they used it in some places to indicate that you didn't pronounce a vowel. So Isabel Pangisnawan is spelled Isabili, although the E isn't pronounced on the L. It's not Isabeli, it's just Isabel Pangisnawan. The same with the S here, not Pangisinawan, but Pangisnawan. Pablo, but not Pabilo, okay? So there's a certain ambiguity. This was an attempt to write final consonants, but it seems it didn't work quite as well as Spanish orthography. And eventually Latin script prevailed. Just to give a few more examples, there were attempts to write final consonants introduced by missionaries in Palawan in the 1960s. That wasn't adopted. Anton Posma's pamutpod, or trimmer, based on the Javanese vowel killer sign, was fairly widely adopted in Hanunoa Mangyan script in Mindoro, but variably. It's not always used. And there are a few other examples of people trying to introduce ways of writing final consonants that never really took hold. So anyway, the script basically disappeared in the face of Latin script, which was much better at writing final consonants, making reading much easier by the end of the 1700s. And varieties of the script only survived and continued to evolve on Mindoro and Palawan. So that's basically all I have to say. I've got a couple of interesting little things that I can show if people are interested later on about adaptations to Latin script conventions, but I'll finish here and leave it to questions.